A King Like Me follows members of the Zulu Club, New Orleans' first Black Mardi Gras crew, as they work to bring the Zulu parade back to the streets for Mardi Gras in 2022 in the face of a global pandemic, Hurricane Ida, and the loss of members due to COVID and gun violence. A King Like Me benefits from an unprecedented access to a stalwart community and a cultural institution as it documents a modern portrait of Black brotherhood leadership and community. Terrific documentary film. I'm telling you, for anyone listening to this conversation, this is another chapter in the history of the United States that I didn't know anything about. I know Mardi Gras, obviously, but there's just so much here. And getting to know the men who are part of Zulu and all of the attendant kind of community around Mardi Gras and the importance of it. It's just terrific, terrific documentary film. It's called A King Like Me. We're joined today by the director, Matthew O. Henderson. Matthew, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Thank you. Yeah, I just love the access that you were able to get with Zulu. Let's start at the beginning. What is Zulu? What is it about?
The Zulu Social Aid and Pleasure Club was started back in 1909 as a benevolent association, and essentially it was a way for the Black community in New Orleans to bury their dead. Because at the time, because of racism, because of segregation, they weren't allowed to bury their dead in the standard in normal funeral parlors or cemeteries throughout New Orleans. And it started essentially as an organization that helped the Black community help themselves, whether it was socially or economically. And really, the organization has grown from that, with its original intent, which was to obviously, like I said before, help the community. But it essentially now is one of the biggest Mardi Gras parading crews in New Orleans. And it's an amazing feat because, when they started in 1909, they were the first Black Mardi Gras and only Black Mardi Gras parading crew in the streets of New Orleans. And that representation, that drive and push to have representation in the Mardi Gras through the Mardi Gras season really has born and an incredible organization that to this day is so impactful, not just that one day on Mardi Gras when they roll, but in the 364 days around the year where they continue to help their community. So our film really is a portrait of the organization. Our lens into the organization begins in June of 2020, the first summer of the pandemic, where their organization was just devastated by the effects of COVID as a result of the Mardi Gras of February of that year and the Zulu Ball of December of the previous year. And it's just a portrait of the organization from 2020 through 2022 when they're finally allowed to roll on Mardi Gras in 2022. But beyond that, it's really an examination of the history of Black culture in New Orleans, as well as the tragedies and triumphs, and also beauty, though, that has emerged from some of those tragedies and triumphs that the organization has gone through throughout its incredibly storied history.
The only other documentary that I can recall that comes to mind about Mardi Gras, not about New Orleans, but about Mobile, Alabama, it's called The Order
Mm-hmm.
of Myths. And again, another slice of American history that I didn't know anything about. Apparently was the original Mardi Gras. Am I
Yeah,
correct in that?
that's correct. Yeah, that's where it started.
And it was segregated. There is just so much that I have, and thank God for films, documentary films like yours, where I get an opportunity to hear a story I was completely unfamiliar with. And so, just as you described, the sort of the reason for the Zulu Club and how they impact what is going on in New Orleans, is just so eye-opening and jaw-dropping at the same time. Let's talk about, because you dive into the personalities. It's one of the joyous things about the film is the opportunity to spend time with the men, predominantly men in the club, but just getting to know them, how you gained the access that you did, and just what revealed itself to you as a filmmaker and just as a person going forward.
Sure. So the genesis of the project, actually, like I mentioned, started back in the summer of 2020, where
Yeah.
in May of that year, Fisher Stevens, who is a producer on this film, accomplished actor and director, who was brought me into this project. We had worked together on a project back in 2016, a documentary called Before the Flood. It was an environmental justice film that featured Leonardo DiCaprio. And we were always trying to find a project to work on again together. At the time, I was one of his camera operators for that film, and we just really had a great experience working together. And so in May of 2020, he read this article that he found just about how devastated the Zulu crew was by Mardi Gras. And he gave me first reached out to his friend Matt Dillon, who is from New Orleans, and Fisher had just finished filming a Justin Timberlake film called Palmer in New Orleans. And he has been working in New Orleans for decades, and really strong roots in the community. So he reached out to his friend who put Fisher in touch with a member of the Zulu Club. And then Fisher reached out to me and said, "Hey, I just read this article. I think there's an amazing story to be told. Are you interested in getting in the car and driving with me down in New Orleans and seeing what's there?" And so, Fisher, myself, and another DP, Bill Kirstein, we jumped in a car and drove from Brooklyn, New York, to New Orleans. It took us about 20 hours. It was a fun trip. One person drove, one person talked to the person that was driving, and one person slept in the back of the SUV. And we just nonstop took a road trip down there and spent about 2.5 days there, filming 16 really in-depth impactful interviews that ranged anywhere between 60 minutes to 90 minutes. And those 16 interviews really became the bedrock of our storytelling. Kind of landing with the emotional core of the film, who is Terrence Rice, our main participant in the film. During those, so that was our first initial trip, and then what we had to do was we produced a sizzle or a trailer for the film that we used to get investors to back the film, but also we had to use that trailer to present to the Zulu Club. So I met on Zoom a few months after we were down there, on Zoom with the Zulu board of directors. And I had to present an excerpt of this trailer to them, explain the reason why we wanted to make this film and why now was the time to tell this film. And then they had to vote on whether or not they wanted this film to happen. And so that board of directors voted and they approved it. And then it had to be brought to the over 800 men who were members of the Zulu Club, and they had to vote on whether or not they wanted this film to be done. And thankfully, they, both the board of directors and the club agreed. And because of the trust that we had, that we established when we went down on that first trip, when we not only spoke with Zulu members, but members who were connected to the community, Zulu opened their doors. It was slow. It wasn't a wide swinging open door. It was a lot of relationship building and trust building that was developed over the course of the 5 years that we made this film. But what it resulted in was a beautifully authentic portrayal of not only the Zulu Club and not only New Orleans culture, but just of the Black experience in America as seen through the lens of the Zulu Club in New Orleans. So
You're right, absolutely. And getting to know these people in the film, I'm not going to give more away here than I should, but
sure.
there is a point, and there's some controversy afoot in
Yep.
the film, discussing some traditions that may or may not feel completely right today. But it's all important. It's all important, but it also gives this kind of contours, this context to the story of the Zulu Social Aid and Pleasure Club and how it's still relevant. Why is it
Yeah.
still relevant, right? And we see that over the course of the film. Is that a fair way to put it?
I think that's extremely fair and accurate. One of my favorite parts about this filmmaking process is the fact that, I am not, from New Orleans. I'm born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, came up with a certain set of values and culture and upbringing that was very different, one from just the South and two from New Orleans, which is like no place in America. But that otherness, that difference actually aided in the process of making this film because it allowed me and the filmmakers and the producers and the editors to bring a curiosity to this film, that a native New Orleanian may not have brought. But one of the things that we did throughout the process is we not only used our characters, our participants, as sounding boards, both of creative decisions and editorial decisions, but also we worked with a lot of native New Orleanian crew members throughout the course of this process who, would provide counsel and also in some instances provide checks and balances, when the storytelling would maybe go off the rails a little bit. But all of that in an effort to create a collaborative, creative environment that produced this film. The controversy, and I agree, I don't want to give up too much because I want your audience to go see and to watch our film that's on Netflix now, of even approaching the controversy in the film, I think what we attempted to do with the film is bring context through history to this tradition that was started with the Zulu organization back in 1909 to better understand the decision making that went into continuing this tradition even to today. And also not just hear the voices of those who are part and connected and love the Zulu organization, but those who challenge, the Zulu organization. But even those who challenge the organization, we were very, very, very specific in this film that every single voice that speaks in this film is the voice of a native New Orleanian. We didn't bring in experts from universities around the country to kind of bring in their understanding. We wanted to trust in the authenticity of the voices that were coming from the place that we were filming.
And the impression I had from the people that are speaking about this particular issue are all with love. I mean,
Yes.
everyone addressed it in a way that was coming from a place of support for
Mm-hmm.
Zulu and for sort of a modern frame around it and understandable. And I understand all the different points of, at least I hope I understand all the points of view that we see in the film. And it just lends this kind of vitality to the group
Yeah.
that this is a group of not people sitting in a darkened room somewhere making decisions just because this is the way we always did it. It is a group of people that are genuinely concerned not only about this particular issue, but also the greater context, right?
Yeah, and one thing that we hope, and it's a grand idea, I think, but one that needs to be mentioned is we hope that this can be a model of the tough conversations that we need to have as a country.
Yeah.
Because what you see taking place in the film is an internal conversation about tradition and culture and the way to move forward into a future that we all believe. But it's a culture, it's a community that's unafraid to have that conversation
Yeah,
with one another,
exactly.
that are like, it's okay if we don't think the same way, if we don't view things or uphold traditions and culture in the same way that, one another, that each individual or each side of the conversation does, but we can approach it respectfully to have the conversation. So, it's an example that we hope that, that those who watch the film can see. And even if you don't understand or agree with the perspectives of either whether it's individuals in this film or broad or wide, let's widen the lens a little bit to those in your community or those in your sphere of influence. We all have things about people and that we interact with every day that we don't agree with. But I think the power and true transformation can come when we get a bit of boldness and courage to have those conversations because it's only going to make us all better. And I think we see that with the Zulu organization.
Absolutely. And also to underscore that this is 365 days a year. This is an organization that is on the ground, is connected, it is part of the community. It's woven into the fabric of the community and all the other things that they are about. Okay,
Yeah.
so this is important in the context of a lot of different issues around race in this country, but also the genuine love that you see and feel from the people that are in the film. And I want to open this up into a little bit of moving away from that particular part of it. The two gentlemen who are on they're fishing near the
Yeah.
beginning of the film, and help me out. The gentleman who says, this is about the Caribbean experience, the sort of tying it back to the roots of New Orleans, of where all of this is happening, and help me with that because this is a part of the film, and for people listening to our conversation, hopefully they'll see A King Like Me. I want them to understand this greater sort of historic context.
Yeah, that's you're talking about brother Terrence Rice, who is the main participant in this film, and he's commenting on the fact that, and also in the film, one of the city councilmen, Oliver Thomas, also mentioned this later on in the film. That there is obviously, not obviously, it's not obvious to everyone, but no place like New Orleans, and the Afro-Caribbean influence and culture that exists in New Orleans. Unfortunately, was brought there because of the transatlantic slave trade, as New Orleans being one of the primary points of entry for enslaved people throughout the slave trade. So when individuals are brought from not only Africa, but through the different islands in the Caribbean and brought into New Orleans, the infusion of culture was extremely aggressive there in a way that produced this amazingly vibrant cultural experience of New Orleans that we see in its music and its food and its culture and its traditions. And so what Terrence is saying in that moment is that, the all of those things that create a native New Orleanian is something that he doesn't want to shy away from. He in that first little soliloquy, he mentions, the fact that, in his life, he never wanted to speak the Queen's English or speak properly. He always wanted to speak like a native New Orleanian, because there's power in understanding the history of New Orleans and especially the history of the Black experience in New Orleans and acknowledging the fact that the Black existence in New Orleans is because of the slave trade, but not using that as a negative, but using that as a power, as to empower himself as a Black native New Orleanian.
Yeah, absolutely. Just want to remind our listeners we're speaking with Matthew O. Henderson. He's the director of the documentary film A King Like Me. It is going to be on Netflix, and help me with the date. I'm sorry, but go ahead.
Yeah, so we premiered on Netflix on June 19th.
It's currently on Netflix, so you can check it out. Netflix.com/ A King Like Me will get you there right to it, or just go on Netflix. I'm sure there's a lot of people listening who already are on Netflix. In the last couple of minutes we have, I just Mardi Gras is this part. I mean, help me out with the tradition of Mardi Gras because it's there's you have Carnival in Brazil. Is this it's kind feels like it's kind of part of this. So I'll call it a tradition. I don't know what I should call it. You got to sin to be saved, right? I mean, just this is just before Lent, right?
Yeah,
The
yeah,
idea of
exactly.
just letting loose and kind of in this kind of orgiastic experience that is Mardi Gras and other traditions like this. Is that am I in the right track here? You got to sin to be saved kind of thing.
No, you're completely right. It's a huge part of it, and I will cautiously attempt to describe it because, again, like I said before, I'm not from New Orleans. I
Yeah,
didn't grow up in carnival tradition. Growing up in Brooklyn, New York, even though we do have a really large West Indian Day parade that takes place Labor Day weekend in New York, but
yeah,
it's no comparison to carnival in New Orleans. But yes, and that's the thing that really excited me about making this film is like I love the genre of magical realism, and that's what New Orleans and that's what Mardi Gras specifically is. It is this social cultural inversion that takes place during this season, and that's another thing that I learned throughout the course of making this film. I thought Mardi Gras was just one day. Mardi Gras is an entire season, several weeks of parades that parade through the city of New Orleans to highlight the different parading crews that take place. And Mardi Gras Day, which takes place on Fat Tuesday, is the day that the
yeah,
most recognized crews roll. But there is this idea of social inversion where the pauper can be a king, on Mardi Gras Day,
yeah,
and that's how the tradition started, where an individual who, was a stevedore, a dock worker, can parade through the streets of New Orleans along with the aristocrats, and the royalty, and the politicians and decision makers. And there was still some intentional segregation, which we go
sure.
into in the film. But today, and it's a season where revelry is allowed. Terrence has this amazing line towards the end of the film is New Orleans is the only place where the senseless make sense. And so on Mardi Gras Day, there is this embracing of that social inversion
Yeah,
for the sake of fun, for the sake of enjoyment, for the sake of purging the soul, so that
exactly.
after Lent, after Mardi Gras, you can go back through your year, through the rest of the year, and be a quote unquote normal citizen.
There you go. Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you for that. Because yeah, and I don't know where the wild Chapatulas, the
Yes.
tribe comes in. There, it seems like
Hmm.
there's a lot of that tradition, that sort of
Yes.
that beautiful tapestry of color, and it's amazing. It's amazing stuff. Check this out. Again, the film is called A King Like Me. It is on Netflix right now. You can see it, and we've been speaking with the director, Matthew O. Henderson. Matthew, thank you so very much for your time and for this film. Thank you.
I appreciate it, Mike. Thanks for having me.